All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. This is the first of a webinar in our fall series. This is really exciting. I'm Jamie Maechtle with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and thank you so much for joining us. And behind the scenes, we have Shauna with the Southwest Wisconsin helping us today. So thank you, Shauna. Today, for this session, we have Dr. Jacobi, Dr. David Jacobi, and Hanna Maechtle. And they both work for Rogers Behavioral Health based in Sheboygan. And they're going to talk about anxiety management and compassion resilience, and what are things that we can do to manage anxiety, manage stress, and how do we handle our compassion fatigue as we continue our work in libraries and in serving the public. So Hanna, feel free to start sharing your screen and feel free to begin.
Thanks, Jamie. Dr. Jacobi and I are really excited to be here today and talk to you a little bit about anxiety, stress management, compassion resilience, how it all works together, and what we can do to be helping ourselves along the way in this ever-changing, ever-stressful world that we live in now. Like I mentioned, we're going to cover compassion resilience basics, kind of give you a recap on what all of that is, introduce where it came from. Stress resilience as a compassion resilience wellness practice, really some simple things we can do to be helping ourselves. And then also we recognize that sometimes that's just not enough. And then Dr. Jacobi is going to take over and talk about a little bit more in-depth stress and ways to best manage it. So let's start with, what is compassion resilience? Where did it come from? Why are we talking about it? The definition for compassion resilience is really simply the power to return to a position of empathy, strength, and hope after the daily witnessing of the challenges those we support face and the realities of the workplace. In short, it's just to be optimistic in a really pretty and perfect world. We started doing compassion resilience work and wrote the curriculum for the toolkit when we started to see a pattern with those that are in what we call helper roles. So if you think health and human services, therapists, librarians, people who serve the community in some capacity, when we're continually exposed to people's trauma, we start to experience secondary trauma, burnout, fatigue is a good word for what we call it. And we decided we need to do something to help support each other. We always want to assume that people are going to be able to act from this position of empathy, strength, and hope, but that gets really difficult when we're constantly impacted by the stressors of our life. And so we said, all right, well, let's try and put some stuff together to help support each other. The first thing we did within the toolkit is we looked at, how we interact with each other. If we know that those we work with on a daily basis are experiencing the same kind of fatigue and the same kind of stressors, how can we support each other in the best way possible so that we have a strong network around us to start? And so we developed the compassionate action steps. I'm going to walk through these steps and then we'll continue through there. So our first step is just being able to notice, simply noticing that those around us might be experiencing some kind of pain. That requires us to be present enough in our environment that I can say, hey, Dr. Jacobi, it seems like you're struggling today. I'm wondering if we can touch base or I can chat. How can I support you? What's going on? And that might sound really straightforward and simple, like, of course, it's going to be obvious, but you'll notice as we continue through the compassion fatigue cycle, when we reach these kind of end stages of compassion fatigue, sometimes we're not even present in the moment to notice other people's pain. Now, when we're working with colleagues, obviously that's really difficult, but even more challenging when we work with the community members and we're supposed to be paying attention for someone else's pain. So that first step is just being able to be present enough in our moment that we are able to recognize those signs of distress. Our second step then is self-check. When we go to help someone work through a problem, we know that they take their own advice best. I could say, well, it sounds like you should do X, Y, or Z based on my own biases, the situations I've gone through in my life, any other appraisals I might feel at that time. but it's best that we are able to set that to the side for the time being. If we get to this point, we call it self-check because we might get here and not be able to set it aside. That's okay, we're human. But in this moment, then it's probably more compassionate to set a boundary to say, Dr. Jacobi, I really hear that you're struggling. I'm just not in the right headspace right now to be able to help you out. I'm wondering if I can connect you with X, Y, or Z, or can we talk tomorrow over lunch? Something like that. Set that compassionate boundary so that you can show up and be helpful to that person rather than anything else in that moment. It also offers a barrier of protection for yourself that you're not drawing more fatigue on you by helping someone else through the situation that they're experiencing. The third step then is to seek to understand. We've said, okay, I can be in this moment. I see your pain. I'm able to put everything aside. We're just going to be listening really for whatever that person is feeling. And this strengths, because even if in that situation you think they've really made a giant mistake or something has gone really wrong, there's probably something you can pull on to say, hey, you did something good here. Even if that's just, you're here to talk to me about it. You're asking for support. So we're listening for feelings and strengths so that later on we can pull on those when it's time to start planning what we're going to do to move forward. Step number 4 is cultivate empathy. That's just being able to develop genuine concern that's deep enough and connected enough to our own experiences that we're motivated to stay in this moment, stay in the process with them to help, but not so deep that we're lost in our own emotions, right? We might not be able to know exactly what they're feeling based on the situation that they're in, but since we've listened for those feelings and strengths, we can probably say, I've felt a similar situation. I wonder if this is what's going to be helpful in the moment. Once we've done all that, we're on to discerning best action. Again, I want to capitalize on people take their own advice best. So this is where we're going to help people into their own wisdom. Chances are, even someone who feels really pretty lost knows what they should do in this situation to help relieve some of their stress, get out of whatever situation they're in. And we just need to get to the nugget of wisdom that's tucked in there. So we're going to do things like, how can I help? What seems best right now? Have you felt like this in the past and what have you done? We're really going to be yielding them to their own answer at that time. And then step number 6 is just to take action. If you've agreed that you're going to take 3 things off their to-do list to help with their stress at that time, be sure you can actually do that and you're not putting yourself in a position of fatigue to do so. Or if you say, let's check in next week, that you follow through and we're able to actually do that. So these steps is just a means for us to help each other through stress. These steps is just a mean for us to be able to act with compassion towards each other. And as a final reminder, sometimes compassion sounds like setting a boundary and offering support at a different time. But we lay this as the groundwork for compassion resilience, because if we're not able to act with this, not only are we experiencing fatigue from the secondary trauma we're experiencing and the burnout from whatever we're doing within our job, we might also start to experience fatigue within our team dynamic. And your team is your support. So we got to make sure that we're on the same page there. We also really understand that our ability to act compassionately with each other highly depends on our own fatigue as well and where we're at in our own brain at that time. We know that no matter what position you're in, no matter where you come from, you're going to experience fatigue in some capacity, some kind of way at some time. It's completely normal. You will go through the compassion fatigue cycle, and that's okay. The idea here is to give you some common language so that when you're acting in those compassionate action steps, you're able to identify where someone might be at and know on a deeper level what they're going through. Then also from there, we can also put in some supports to help slow this cycle of fatigue down. So let's walk through that a little bit. We pulled from the work of Eric Gentry. So he did tons of studies on compassion fatigue and what those in these helper professions experience over time. And he developed what's called this compassion fatigue pathway. We added the cute little cats on there because we think they're cute and adorable and they help you out a little bit. So at the top there, we have what's called the zealot phase. This is where we see someone who's either just started a new role, fresh out of school, taken on a new initiative, but they feel really pretty zealot. They're ready to go, taking on new tasks. They want to help. They want to make a difference and go the extra mile. And that all sounds super dandy and great. But when we get stuck in the zealot phase, it's usually an indicator that there's more going on. For example, I might stay in the zealot phase because it feels really great to have someone depend on me as their go-to person. It might feel really great to check stuff off my ever 12-page long to-do list. But if I'm that zoned in on my work, if I'm so delved into just getting the tasks done, it might make that step number one of the compassion cycle, where I'm supposed to notice someone else's pain and be present in my environment, really hard to do because I'm simply just bogged down by my own tasks. Step number two there, or the second part of the pathway, is the irritability stage. This is when we start to see that maybe the environment I work in isn't as perfect as it sounded when I applied for the job, or maybe I don't feel as though I can depend on my coworkers in the way I was hoping, because that's the way life works. But we start to see some anger and cynicism, diminished creativity, sadness, feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, just that things aren't as beautiful as they were chalked up to be. The next stage there is withdrawal, and that's where we really are just completely overwhelmed by the complexity of our workplace. When we are in these helper fields, we don't have one title, we don't have one job. We're often doing that of many different people just to help those that we serve in the best way possible. The complexity can be really, really overwhelming, cause you to withdraw. Sometimes we see physical illness, difficulty empathizing, we feel numb to those around us, makes those compassionate action steps really difficult. We put in here that absenteeism, people stop showing up when they're needed, but also presenteeism, in that you're just there, but you're not really engaging, but you're present, but you're not actively participating in your role. Someone might stay there because after a while, when a system goes through this compassion fatigue cycle, if you're stuck in this withdrawal phase, and let's say you're only giving 60% to your job and your effort, but that 60% is getting you by, you might stay stuck in that withdrawal phase because someone else is just simply isn't noticing. And then our final stage here on the bottom is the zombie phase. That's just complete checkout, sense that you can't do enough, but you have to do it all because you're the only person that can all at the same time. There's a sense of persecution in that you have to get it done because otherwise who knows what's going to happen. You're not motivated by your own wanting to help other people. It's just, you're just doing it. You're checking the boxes and moving through the day. And at the end of all of this, we're stuck between choosing renewal, this pathway of renewal, or this pathway of pathology, really. When we're able to choose renewal, that's where compassion resilience comes into play. Again, I want to emphasize this is a completely normal cycle. Everyone will go for it. In fact, we see systems go through it at the same time. A really clear example is when you think of a school district or a school building. September 1, they might be in that zealot phase, ready to take on the school year, good to go. By the time winter break comes around, maybe we're a little bit in that irritability and withdrawal stage. And by June, a lot of teachers are just zombies. They're getting through the day, they're ready to reset for summer and try again. What we want to do is capitalize on that there are things we can put into place to slow this cycle of fatigue down or make it more bearable, make it easier to choose that pathway of renewal rather than pathology. Because when we choose pathology, we often see people end up leaving the field, saying they're not cut out for this work, when in fact they might be the best candidate for the work. They just don't have the right supports in place. Okay, great. So what are those supports? What can we do? The Compassion Resilience Toolkit uses the work of the Samaritan Family Hands and pulls on the wellness compass to identify kind of a whole well-rounded practice for self-care and well-being. The wellness compass is broken into 4 different quadrants. We have the heart, the spirit, the strength, and the mind. The mind part focuses on things like mindfulness and a growth mindset. The spirit focuses on your core values and bringing yourself back to why you do what you do every day. The strength is where we're going to kind of focus today. And then the heart piece is emotion regulation and relationship building. But within that strength piece, we talk about something called stress resilience. It really asks you to take a peek at what you're going through on a daily basis. And Dr. Jacobi's lights just shut down.
All right.
We're motion activated in here. Within that stress resilience conversation and activity, it asks you 3 questions. And the most important question within that is this stress that I'm currently experiencing Is the stress that's causing me anxiety or to feel fatigued avoidable? Is it something I don't have to be in? And sometimes the answer is yes. You can put in different tools to reduce your stress, pass off tasks to other people. And sometimes when it's the middle of winter and you're a librarian and you have people using your space for other things than just the library and you're faced with these challenges, that stress isn't avoidable. And so all of these practices within the wellness part of the Compassion Resilience Toolkit is really great to look at, great things to have in your back pocket, and sometimes just simply isn't enough. We need more support, we need a better understanding of what our body is experiencing, our mind is going through, and we need to be able to help on a deeper level than just coming up with a stress resilience plan and all of those things. That's where Dr. Jacobi comes in, and he's going to talk a little bit further on what stress really is and all of that good stuff.
They should have done it where I turn the lights on just as I'm starting. It's kind of been great. All right, can we go to the next slide, Hannah? And thank you, by the way, that was excellent information. Thank you so much. So when we talk about, and I do a lot of work with adults and with kids who are struggling with anxiety and depression, and when we talk about emotional distress or just stress in general, there are things that we look for that sort of indicate that things are starting to get a little bit out of hand. Certainly, eating or sleeping too much or too little, right? I can't fall asleep because my mind is going over things, or I'm just so worn out or pooped out from worrying all day that I just need some more time to kind of chill out a little bit. It's very natural when we're anxious, stressed, or depressed to pull away. And I know Hannah's already touched on some of these things, but it's expected to some extent that people are going to try to avoid or isolate because they're just not able to handle things in the way that they used to when they weren't under this much stress. Related to that, again, having low or no energy. I tell people that if you're stressed, it's really like kind of walking on a treadmill during the day. By the end of the day in particular, you're just pooped. You're exerting and putting out so much energy that it's just difficult to kind of feel like you have enough at the end of the day for yourself, for family, and so forth. Unexplained aches and pains. So a lot of our adults and kids with anxiety and stress will say, my stomach hurts, my head hurts. And those are understandable reactions to excessive stress. Feelings of helpless or hopelessness. So again, Hanna touched on that. Will things change? Will I feel better or feel differently in time? Certainly people try to self-medicate in different ways, sometimes with food, but it can also be smoking. It can be using substances such as alcohol or marijuana, things of that nature, or overusing prescription medications. There's also, again, that worrying a lot of time. Feeling guilty but not sure why. Trying to resolve things via worrying. If I worry about it enough, maybe I'll come to some sort of conclusion or understanding or way forward in terms of knowing how to deal with this. Certainly there can be thoughts typically of hurting oneself. Some people certainly have turned to self-harm as a way to moderate some of those negative emotions that they're experiencing. Or just feeling so overwhelmed that you can't imagine life being any different than it is now. Maybe it's that sort of zombie state or beyond that Hanna described. And then again, having difficulty adjusting to going from work to home or home to work each day because there could be such a discrepancy in terms of how I view those situations. Next slide, please. Stress can be a problem when we feel it for no apparent reason, or those stress symptoms tend to be more continuous over time, right? So if we have something coming up, like a presentation to the library staff, there may be a tendency for us to feel somewhat stressed, but once the talk is over, we feel better and we move on. When stress becomes a problem, it's more chronic, right? And even when we think about anxiety disorders where things are really getting out of hand, we really do tend to see that stress and feelings of anxiety persist for typically months on end, and with some other things happening as well. But again, having these issues for a long time can spell some trouble ahead. Certainly the symptoms are excessive or out of proportion to what you think is reasonable in this situation. So I'm just overly stressed. I'm overly worried. I can't fall asleep. I'm irritable with my family and my coworkers. This just doesn't seem like me. This stress is taking its toll on my life, and I'm not exactly sure how to remedy that. There's also some measure of impairment or interference in normal activities. Again, doing your work as you would expect to, struggling with, again, being around other people, or even wanting to be around coworkers or friends and family. And just things like the quality of life changes, right? So problems with being able to focus and concentrate on things. Again, being more irritable. When I'm stressed, I do get more irritable. Things bother me more. I just want to say, stay away from me, let me be by myself, and let me kind of sort through this on my own, which is that withdrawal piece as well. Next slide, please. There's also an impact when you look at stress on different aspects of us. So certainly on your body, as I mentioned, the idea of headaches and stomach aches are very common. For people who worry excessively, we've noticed specifically that they have a lot of tension and muscle pain in their neck and into their shoulders, again, because they're kind of walking around as if they're waiting for something dangerous to happen. I tell people it's like walking through the forest waiting for a bear to jump out at any moment. You're on edge. And so your body responds in that way. Chest pain, again, can be from breathing incorrectly. Again, feeling fatigued, right? My body's working overtime because I'm stressed or worried. I am going to be tired by the end of the day. Changes in sex drive, again, stomach upset, and of course, problems falling asleep, staying asleep. Those can be really issues. And as we know, sleep is so fundamental to everything else that we do. Impact on your mood, again, anxiety, restlessness. I can't sit still. My body is activated. Lack of motivation or focus, right? Again, I know Hanna kind of talked about some of these things. I just don't feel like I want to go to work. I don't want to do or overachieve or even do the things that I need to do to fulfill my job responsibilities. Feeling overwhelmed, again, irritable, and then certainly sadness and depression. I just need to withdraw from it all. I can't manage it. I can't deal with it. In part because I have low energy. I'm not enjoying things that I used to enjoy, can't concentrate, all those sorts of symptoms that go along with feeling sad or depressed. And then behaviorally, again, I mentioned some of these, but overeating or undereating, angry outbursts. With kids, it's usually with their parents. With adults, it can be with their significant other or other people who are close to them and their family. Self-medication, we talked about social withdrawal, and then also giving up some of the things that we know are good for keeping us healthy, like not exercising or not being as active as we once were. Next slide. This is very interesting. I think when we think about stress, we oftentimes think about more big events in our lives. So what is the impact of trauma? Going through a divorce, losing somebody, including a job, financial, legal concerns, and so forth and so on, versus the things that kind of happen to us on a regular basis or daily basis. We call those things daily hassles. So every day I get stuck in traffic going to and from work. My kids are going through a phase where they're just being really resistant and oppositional and just not behaving in the way that they used to or that I want them to. Getting involved in disagreements with significant others in your life. Problems with coworkers, right? Those things arise on a typically regular basis. I had a coworker who was on the phone for 3 hours waiting for customer service to connect with her. So you could tell she was frustrated. She was just really wanting that situation to be dealt with. So there's lots of things that happen on a regular basis that actually can have the same impact as these larger events. And what's also very important about stressful events is two things. One is that people don't respond to these things in the same way. I often say to people, for some, divorce is a very devastating experience. Some people, after they get divorced, they throw a party, right? Because they're relieved. Oh my gosh, I got rid of that person that was pulling me down. My life is so much freer now. I feel much better. So our interpretation of these things is really important. It can also apply to situations where very few of us would find any kind of silver lining. Like if I'm driving home and I get a flat tire, no one goes, yes, I'm happy to have the flat tire. Now I get to see how quickly I can change the tire. But how we react to that does depend on our interpretation or appraisal. In other words, I can say, yeah, this stinks, but I'm just going to change the tire and or call AAA and just get this taken care of and get home because I really want to watch the Packers tonight. Versus, this always happens to me. Bad things always happen when I don't want them to, and life is unfair, and the world is out to get me. And as you can think about those different appraisals, you can see how you're going to respond emotionally, behaviorally, and so forth in response to that. It can either be a sort of a not so bad experience, or it can be a really almost catastrophic type of experience based on our appraisals. All right, next slide. So what are some ways to manage stress? And what I would say is you may have heard of these things before. I think there's a difference between the knowledge of these things and then implementing them, of course. They also, a little bit of each of these things may have a cumulative impact on our ability to manage stress, to moderate that stress response much better than maybe we are currently or have in the past. So things like, we'll talk about behavioral activation. We'll talk about some basic things, that kind of physiological response to stress, relaxation, social support. How do people in my life interact in both very intimate ways, but also in maybe less intimate ways to kind of support me or help me work through some of these really difficult situations. And then I think sometimes things that are really overlooked are things like diet, exercise, and sleep. Right? They are fundamental to everything we do, but we kind of accept them in a sense. Oh, well, I'm doing that. I'm eating well enough, or I'm going for a walk once a month. That's good enough. But let's talk a little bit more about those as well. Next slide, please. When people get anxious, when people get depressed, as we mentioned, there's a tendency to isolate, to withdraw from our world, right? It's too much to deal with things, work, the demands of family members, the demands of daily life. And so you'll find, understandably, that people will withdraw from their lives in a way that in the short term maybe gives them a sense of relief. I don't have to deal with some of these things. But in the long term, this just ends up adding to their feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And it really doesn't get them where they want to go, which obviously is to feel less anxious or less sad or depressed. So the solution really is to temporarily adjust the expectations that we have regarding our responsibilities for ourselves in the context of work, in the context of family and friendships and activities that I engage in a regular basis. So we tend to focus on three areas that if we're engaged in our lives and we're doing things from these different categories, we're generally feeling okay. And we're generally able to weather stress even more effectively when we do them. These are things like enjoyable activities, right? Being able to go for a walk on a really nice day, watch a movie or a show that I have been meaning to watch, going out to eat, whatever it might be, but having a list of things that you used to do or have gotten away from doing because of your stress or life events. Routine activities, getting up, brushing your hair, brushing your teeth, cleaning the house, doing chores. Those sorts of things may not feel like they are things that would add to my feeling of happiness, but we're accomplishing things. And when we accomplish things, we do feel better. We feel that sense of reward in doing that. The third category is what we call valued things or valued activities. This can be anything. It can be relationship building. I really would like to spend more time with my significant other because we've just been so busy. Let's try to do maybe a date night every week. Or I'd like to spend more time with my child or be more involved in their activities. I'd like to volunteer in my community at a food bank or something like that and give back to the community in that way. Those are valued sorts of activities, again, that lead to feeling really positive about yourself. So what we found and what the literature supports is that when people engage in pleasurable, routine, and valued activities on a regular basis, they end up getting a lot of what's called positive reinforcement or rewards, in a sense. Once they start feeling those things, it actually increases energy and hopefulness, and they're able to do more and more. And the more that we do, the better we tend to feel. Not like we're going to feel overjoyed, but we're certainly going to feel less sad, less stressed, more functional, less impaired, less distressed overall. Next slide. Relaxation. Again, very simple. It is something that needs to be practiced for it to be effective for you. I've had people say, well, I tried that deep breathing or that relaxation thing, Dr. Jacobi, and I just didn't feel any change. Well, you're not going to feel any change. It's like saying, well, I went for a mile walk and I don't feel like I'm in shape at all, because you have to practice. You have to go through the process of learning how to kind of retrain your breathing if you're not breathing properly. If I breathe very short and shallow, just for emphasis, like that, I'm going to start to notice that my chest probably feels tight. I'm going to notice some tingling sensations in my fingers or on my lips. I may feel lightheaded or dizzy just from breathing incorrectly. So relaxation in terms of breathing retraining can be really helpful in just trying to settle things down. And then also things that we just call progressive muscle relaxation, the tensing and then releasing of different muscle groups. We generally have people go from literally the top of their head all the way down to their toes. Tense and release, feel that feeling of relaxation. If you can practice that a couple times a day over the course of a couple of weeks, you should be able to start to notice that your body will respond more favorably when you do go through that process of trying to kind of settle things down physiologically. Next slide, please. Interpersonal skills. Again, there's that tendency to avoid, to isolate, to be away from people. We may not feel comfortable reaching out to other people to help talk about different things. And I oftentimes think about relationships as a bullseye. On the very outer circle, maybe people that I work with or acquaintances. And as I move closer and closer to the middle, my relationships get more intimate, they get closer. So for many of you, your significant other is someone that you can turn to and talk to, and if you're having a bad day, they can kind of help, provide some validation or explore some ways to help you problem solve and work through situations. But you also need people that you can just go hang out with and have a glass of wine or go bowling or go to a Packer game or things like that. That doesn't necessarily involve a lot of deep conversation. Different kinds of relationships are helpful, and different levels of intimacy are also helpful in terms of being able to develop and connect with others. Next slide, please. Social support, kind of what I just mentioned there before, but learning how to connect with others, doing so on a regular basis, that can be part of that behavioral activation that I mentioned. Can I, for example, ask a couple coworkers out after work on a weeknight or on a Friday afternoon or Friday after work? Can I make plans to spend time with my kids or my significant other? Again, just so this idea that we have that connection to other people and know how to interact with them successfully. Next slide. So how can we get some of that, those connections? One is just shared interests. One of the things we tell our teenagers is, try to involve yourself in an extracurricular that's of interest to you, whether that's sports, math club, art club, whatever it is. When you're around people that have similar interests, you are going to connect, right? And you're more likely to find people there who are going to, feel comfortable for you to interact with. Convenient connections, right? We tend to, I know many of you don't remember Dobie Gillis, but Thalia Menninger used to say propinquity, which just means that we tend to connect with people who are closer to us, people that we work with, our neighbors and so forth. So, look for opportunities for that. And then family and current friends. There may be opportunities for other friends to join your friend group in a way. So that allows you, again, to make new connections with other people. Next slide, please. Assertiveness, again, is just a communication. It's an interpersonal skill that allows us to communicate more effectively. Many of us, especially when we're stressed, tend to be more passive. I don't want to deal with it. I'm just going to say yes. If somebody wants me to drive them to the airport at 4 in the morning, sure, I'll do it. I just don't want to fight. I don't want to argue with them. There's also passive aggressive, which is really just being aggressive without any accountability, right? So my friend was 45 minutes picking me up, late picking me up. And so the next time I go to pick them up, I'm 45 minutes late. Again, that's not really great for relationship building, and it's not assertiveness. And then there is aggressiveness, right? People will just sort of bully other people to get what they want. None of those styles is necessarily a good long-term way of interacting. So we talk about assertiveness as really being a way to express your concerns, doing so in a direct but friendly way. The goal isn't necessarily to get what you want. The goal is for yourself to be able to say, this thing bothered me and I expressed it. And just the process of expressing it is really helpful to you. You're going to feel better about yourself, and you're certainly more likely to get that situation changed or resolved based on that sort of behavior. So let's go to the next slide, and I can just give you a quick bare bones. There's different forms of assertiveness. To me, these are sort of the three essential elements. So the scenario here is, again, your friend has been 45 minutes late to pick you up on at least 2 separate occasions in the past month. So what are some of the basic elements? The first is to describe what it is that's bothering you. And the idea here is to focus on the behavior. John, you've been 45 minutes late to pick me up on a couple of occasions in the past few weeks without giving me a call to let me know. So I'm not saying, John, you're lazy. John, you're being inconsiderate. I'm just focusing on what John did. You were late to pick me up and you didn't call me. The next pace, express. Why does this bother you? Some people wouldn't care. They might say, thank heaven I had that extra 45 minutes to, clean up the house or something. But if it's upsetting to you, you can say, I'm upset that you arrived late, and I'm upset that you didn't call to tell me that you were arriving late. Okay. And lastly is, what do you want to see happen? What do you want John to do differently next time that you think can remedy the situation? Moving forward, I'd like for you to arrive when you say you will. If you're running late because of something you can't control, please call to let me know. So as you can see, this is respectful. It's focusing on behavior. It's expressing just real simply kind of, this is bothersome to me. And here's what you can do to remedy the situation. There's not a lot of mystery to assertiveness. There's just a lot of misconceptions about what assertiveness is. And it, again, is meant to be direct but friendly, focusing on behavior, asking for what you need. The process of being assertive is more important than the result of being assertive. Okay, next slide. Diet. Myself trying to eat better in these last few weeks, I've noticed that my ability to manage and handle stress is better than when I was eating donuts. Interestingly, about 15 years ago, there was a documentary called Super Size Me, where the gentleman ate McDonald's 3 meals a day for a month. And they had a little side vignette where they went to an alternative school and they made one change, and that was donuts are delicious. They made one change, and that was to serve the kids healthy lunches and snacks, so they couldn't get access to candy and sugared sodas and things like that. And what they noticed was that the behavioral problems that they experienced, or the frequency of behavioral problems, reduced significantly with just that one change. So when these kids were well fed, they were able to tolerate things better. They were probably less irritable, less bothered by things, less stressed. So let's not underestimate the benefits of trying to eat a reasonably healthy diet. So some suggestions, again, eat by the clock as opposed to eating when you're stressed or when you're depressed. Obviously, we can't avoid sugar. I love sugar, but all things in moderation. Also, I'm not dieting now. I'm just trying to eat a healthier diet, right? So I'm not trying to limit myself to 1,000 calories. I'm probably having the same number of calories, but I'm, doing more exercise. I'm eating healthier foods. I'm eating better portions, right? And all those things can add up over time, and they're sustainable, right? I know that this is something I can sustain for a long time. Also, stay hydrated. I know these are kind of simple things, but when people get dehydrated, they feel like they feel when they're depressed. Oh, I don't have any energy. Oh, I can't get anything done. I'm not motivated. All because they just don't have enough fluids in them. Next slide, please. Exercise. There's a ton of data that says that regular exercise has an anti-anxiety and an anti-depression sort of, or mood enhancing impact. The other effects are things like exhilaration. When I'm out and I'm doing something, riding a bike on a nice day, it's exhilarating. I feel better. Mood improvement, energy increases. Again, also a fantastic way to deal with stress reduction. And it doesn't have to be going for a 3-mile run. It can be going for a walk, a bike ride, shooting hoops with your child in the backyard. It doesn't really matter as long as it's consistent, a few times a week consistently. Next slide, please. Sleep. Sleep is fundamental to everything that we do. And again, I know this is one of those things where we sort of accept it. I only get 6 hours and I still, am able to function. Well, that may be, but most people do need at least 8 hours of sleep. Kids need more like 9 or 10 to be functional. So we talk a lot about what's called sleep hygiene, things that you can do to help support sleep, a consistency in terms of your routine that allows you to be able to fall asleep consistently and get up feeling rested. So we talk about things like don't try to use over-the-counter sleep medication, at least, occasionally maybe, but not, chronically. We tell people to try to do your best to go to bed and get up at the same time, even on weekends, or at least within an hour. Try not to go to bed early, right? Just go to bed when you're tired. Really, that's the best way to do it. Try to set a standard rising time, even if you can't fall asleep till 2 in the morning and it's a Friday night and you don't have to work on Saturday. Do your best to try to get up at a reasonable hour, because that will help reset you for the following night. Make sure your bedroom is for sleep only. I know some people do other things, but try to associate bed with feeling sleepy and sleep. So a little bit of reading might be okay, and some other things that people do, but try not to have make a fort on your bed or have other things that are not associated with sleep. Cool, quiet, and dark typically is what we need to be able to sleep effectively. Even if you're tired, do your best not to nap during the day. That really can screw up your ability then to fall asleep that night. Prepare for sleep. Most people have routines that they follow. Try not to watch really, violent shows before bed. Try not to do a lot of active things before bed. Try not to eat a lot or spicy foods or things that might affect you in that way. And if you can't sleep, you can try a little breathing or distractions, or just get up. I know it seems silly. Get up and go somewhere else and read for a while, right? Until you feel sleepy again, then go back to bed. Next slide, please. Perfectionism. A lot of us, especially in the helping professions, want to do things perfectly. We want to be the best at what we do. The perfectionism requires a lot of time. It typically is very stressful, always striving for that. When people who have what we would call dysfunctional perfectionism don't meet their goals, they tend to be very critical, self-critical of themselves, which is not very motivating. They tend to, if they for some reason meet some standard that they've set for themselves, they say, well, if I met it, it must not be too difficult, so I'm going to keep adjusting it higher and higher. So they're always this elusive sort of carrot that they're looking for, trying to get, and it's never a satisfying sort of experience for people. The good enough principle is basically, can I just do enough to meet the demands of what it is? So, I've got, Thanksgiving coming up and I'm the one doing most of the food prep. Do I have to have a Martha Stewart moment? Or can I just make some really good foods and try to enjoy myself? Focus on something other than preparing the perfect meal. Do I have to get the perfect gift for somebody, or just something that they would like that doesn't take a whole lot of my time and energy or money to get? All these kinds of things of kind of looking for what's good enough in this situation, right? What gets me through and allows me to do what I need to do without adding stress, the stress of doing things perfectly, of always feeling like I have to do things perfectly. That actually ends up robbing us of any joy that we get typically from being perfect. Next slide. Death anxiety. This I thought was kind of interesting. Irving Yalom, for those of you who are familiar, is sort of the guru of group therapy. If you're in graduate school, there's this huge, thick book that he wrote on how to do group therapy and the benefits of that. And one of the things that he noted that I thought was interesting was things that he noted about death from working with people who were in a cancer support group. One is deciding what's important in life and what isn't. not being troubled by unimportant matters, right? So we have that luxury if we are struggling with a diagnosis such as cancer to kind of avoid things or avoid people or things that just really aren't that big a deal. A sense of liberation. Certain things I don't want to do, and I think for me, as I get older, it is easier for me to say no to things, right? I feel more confident in that process. These people are able to have that sense as well. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. And that's the way it is. An enhanced sense of living in the immediate present rather than postponing life until retirement or something else happens. When I move away, when I get that new house, when I'm in that new relationship or whatever it may be, then I'll be happy, or then I'll do this, that, and the other thing. No, try to live if you can in the moment. A vivid appreciation of just the basics of life, right? So we're going through fall now, a wonderful time of year. I used to hate it because it represented going back to school, but now I really enjoy it. The falling leaves will happen soon, holidays and so forth. Can I really just appreciate and focus my attention on those different things in my life that I can be grateful for? Deeper communication with loved ones, right? I don't have that barrier as much anymore. I can just be more open because, hey, this may not have as many opportunities to do so in the future. Fewer interpersonal fears, less concern about rejection, and greater willingness to take risks. I think all of these things in this way of thinking can be very productive and probably healthy for us, which just because of our own stress and anxiety and concerns, we oftentimes don't allow ourselves to do these things. Next slide. We're almost done here. Thoughts on happiness. This was interesting to me. I didn't think about it this way, but frequent small events have a bigger impact on our happiness than occasional large events, right? So people think, oh, when I, retire, then I'm going to be so happy, or, when I have my first child, or I get married, or I get that promotion, or whatever it is, then, that's going to make me truly happy. It's actually not true at all. What's really true is that the little things that happen on a regular basis are more likely to bring happiness, or at least the absence of unhappiness, into our lives. So as I have here, spending 15 minutes, every evening, or once a week or a few times a week with a cold beverage and a sympathetic friend will probably make you happier than winning the lottery. What are things that I can do on a regular basis that bring me joy? And then try to incorporate those into my life. That can be part of that behavioral activation that we talked about. So again, stop looking. Total happiness is not attainable. True happiness or freedom from unhappiness comes when we focus on living a life of generosity and integrity. Can I look at myself in the mirror in the morning and at night and go, I lived a life of integrity today. And what did I do to make someone else's life a little bit better, a little bit easier? Did I smile at somebody? Did I say hello? Did I give $5 to the person asking for it on the street? Did I compliment somebody? Did I raise somebody up, at work? Jim, you're doing a great job. I'm so thankful that we're able to work together. Those kinds of little things can really have an impact. And not to disclose too much, but I try to do that more and more over time. I really appreciate the people that I work with, and I'm letting them know more so now than I ever have, because I want them to know how much I appreciate them. I think they feel better. I sure feel better when I do those kinds of things. And I think, is there another slide? There is. General guidelines would help manage anxiety and stress. One is try to avoid avoiding. So try to confront fears, try to figure out a way forward. Sometimes we talk about thought challenging. Can I look at a situation and come up with a more balanced way of thinking that might then motivate me to be able to manage the situation more effectively? In our world, in the OCD and anxiety world, the treatment for anxiety disorders is exposure. We do it in a graded fashion. We do it repetitively. And we try to do it in a way that is not, again, overwhelming for that individual. So second point, kind of similar, don't avoid things that make you anxious. Again, anxiety only is worse when people avoid or isolate. Instead of providing reassurance, ask that others validate your fears. So validation is just acknowledging that my experience, my thoughts, my feelings have meaning, and or at least meaningful to me. instead of, it'll be okay, don't worry about it. That's not helpful. Somebody's saying, sounds like you had a really rough day, Dave. I'm sorry to hear that. Or help me understand why it is that was so troubling for you today. I really want to be there for you. Validation is much more helpful. And then if you're going into a situation that's really difficult for you, have a plan, right? Is there something that I can do, something I can prepare for that will allow me to manage the situation more effectively? One more slide, maybe. That's it.
Wow, thank you, Hannah and Dr. Jacobi. Lots of information to take away from that today. We do have some time for some questions. So if anybody does have a question, feel free to submit that in the Q&A panel, and we can take those. I have to say to both of you that I don't know, you two should be working on a podcast or something, I feel like, because I could listen to the two of you talk all day. There was something about, even though you were talking about stress and anxiety, I felt very calm listening. You might want to consider that. I'm just saying.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
I had a comment that just came in that said that was really amazing. Thank you so much. I have to agree. I have a question. So we talked about stress, anxiety, things we can do to alleviate it. What is the breaking point? Or what do you talk to like when you're talking to a loved one or maybe a patient? What is that breaking point between I'm really stressed out, I'm kind of stressed out right now, to, hey, you need to go seek medical help, or maybe you need to go to the doctor, or maybe you need to adjust or get on some medication or adjust your medication. What are signs of that? I'm just stressed out, to that point of you need to seek medical help.
Okay. You want me to handle that one, Hannah?
Sure,
okay.
Go for it.
So we look at things, again, stress tends to, or at least we think about it as being somewhat transient, meaning, something's happening at work. I've got a presentation coming up. I've got a review. I've got some project at home that I'm working on that's just adding to my stress. But once that situation is resolved or over, I'm usually feeling better. When we think about things like chronic anxiety that's more problematic, we're looking at things like it being around for a long time. So in our diagnostic manual, for some reason, and it is arbitrary, but 6 months pops up, meaning I've been dealing with these pretty significant symptoms of anxiety and stress for quite a while, right? It's not resolving when I get that presentation done. It's not resolving when I fix that project at home. It just seems to be there regardless of the situation in life. There's also some measure of pretty significant impairment. So with stress, we're often able to function, go to school, go to work, manage okay. But when it's really chronic, like an anxiety disorder, I'm probably struggling to go to school. A lot of our kids in our programs, as Hanna knows, we both work together working with kids with anxiety. They're not going to school, or if they do, it's a pretty much of an effort to get them to go. They're not socializing, they're isolating more. There's behavioral problems, angry outbursts, not getting work done, academic performance declines pretty significantly. And so those are a couple things that we look to. So it's chronic, it's impairing. And then oftentimes the third thing is just, it's subjectively distressing. The person says, I'm overwhelmed. I'm just worrying all the time, or I can't, with OCD, I can't stop washing my hands, and it's taking up time, and I'm late for work because of it, or my significant other is yelling at me because I'm in the shower for 2 hours a night. Whatever it is, there's some, distress as well involved. Anna, anything you want to?
I think that covers it beautifully, Dr. J.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Another comment and question came in. The steps for mental resilience sounded more preventative than how to recover from the zombie stage. Are there other resources I can read on recovering from that stage of compassion fatigue?
Yeah, for sure. I think when you've, the toolkit itself in its whole does have a lot of those, how do we recover, how do we move forward kind of things. And for the sake of time, we didn't talk about them a lot today, but one of the most important conversations I think that comes out of doing compassion resilience work through the toolkit is we have a conversation where You say, these are all of the things that are driving my fatigue. These are also the things that are driving my resilience. So what's emptying my cup and what's filling up my cup? And then we look at that list and we say, where do I have control and where do I not have control? And once we've deemed we've got some control over, so some examples here, we often see things like right now, COVID protocols, cleaning protocols, or not being able to go into the office. Thanks for throwing that in there, Jamie, as drivers of fatigue. But we also might see, in a school system, a student isn't catching on to what I'm trying to teach, kind of thing. COVID protocols right now, I don't really have control over. Sorry, we've got to do them. Whether or not a student is getting, understanding the information, I might have some control over, right? But at a certain extent, it's in their hands too. So we go through and we code what's in our control and what's in our not. And then the big question we ask is, okay, now if you think about your day, what percentage of your time do you spend giving attention to, thinking about, exerting energy to the things that you've deemed out of your control? Oftentimes people come back and have this kind of light bulb moment of like, oh, more than I probably should. And it's helpful to bring some attention to it at some point, right? Venting feels good. We've got to get it off our chest. But when we are continuing to focus on the things that are out of our control, it's only driving our fatigue further. When we can focus on the things that are in our control, which are often what drive our resilience, we might see a perspective shift. And that's one of the things that comes out of the toolkit that I think is really helpful for people to do, just to pause and say, do I have control or do I not? Is it worth my time to continue to give this energy to? Or is it something, do I need to do something else? Do I need to ask someone else for support? Do I need to see if someone else is experiencing this so we can work on it together? But definitely, and that link that Jamie just put in the chat there is to the whole toolkit website, and all of that is completely free for all of you to ask with or access with tons of different resources and information for that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Another comment and question. I have 2 staff members who are dealing with some large life stressors on top of the rest of life stressors. So what are some of the best suggestions for me to help them? I have provided the listening ear, but now I have become the sounding board for each shift that they work. So it seems like they are productive after that talk, but then I leave work where I am weighed down more than I would be on the normal shifts for me.
Go ahead, Anna. That sounds like that's right up your alley.
What we're talking about is that those compassionate action steps. At a certain point, it is more compassionate, although difficult. I'm not saying this is easy to do by any means, but to set a compassionate boundary and just say, and when you've set a boundary, you want to really do a couple things. You want to identify why you're saying no to what they're asking you at that time, but what's that's serving for you. So your yes might be, I really want to help you. I really appreciate your work and all of that good stuff. And in order to be my best self at work and continue to show up each day, we have to have a different conversation, or we have to try something else. So that might sound like, I really care about you as a person, and it sounds like you're struggling a lot. I'm wondering if we can look at other resources, because we keep having the same conversation, and then we can share some resources. So as difficult as it is, it's not helpful and it's not healthy for you to continue to have this vicious cycle and same conversation each day. And it's more compassionate to set that boundary and try and move them forward. At a certain point, it's tough love and saying like, hey man, this is where we're at right now. This is what it's doing to the people around you. And it's no longer just affecting you, it's bleeding in other places. And that's where we start to see maybe this is more beyond stress. This is fatiguing on a more chronic level.
Thank you. Another question, and I think this will be our last one as we're almost out of time. I find that my anxious thoughts produce anxious sensations in my body, which in turn feed my anxious thoughts. Any ideas on how to break this vicious cycle?
Really good question. We talk about the cognitive behavior triangle, that our emotions are connected to how we think and to what we do. So when we feel stressed or anxious, there's a tendency for us, as both Hannah and I mentioned, to withdraw. It's just easier. I just don't want to be around the things that provoke my anxiety. There's also what we call maladaptive ways of thinking, and especially with anxiety, those can be things like thinking the worst, catastrophic kinds of thoughts, or assuming that terrible things are more likely to occur than they really are, right? So somebody who's had a panic attack, which are not pleasant experiences for those of you who've had one, subsequent to that, anytime they notice any kind of change in their physiology, they go, holy crap, I'm in big trouble here. I must be having a heart attack. And, odds are they're not, but they tend to assume that these terrible things are more common than they really are. Our approach tends to be kind of twofold. One is we can certainly challenge those maladaptive thoughts. We can look at them more critically and say, well, does the evidence support this or not, right? So kind of critically look at it and see if I come up with what we would call a more balanced way or a healthier way of thinking about that situation. Probably even more importantly, and I know Hanna would agree with me on this, is the behavioral change is even more important, because behavioral change, whether it's confronting a fear, whether it's making a decision to do something differently, like Hanna just mentioned with compassion, often does change how we feel and also changes how we view things. So when people do exposures with us, confronting their fears, that does change how they think about that situation. It also changes how they feel. Oh gosh, I did have that presentation with the library staff and I didn't make a fool of myself. Good for me. I guess the worst doesn't happen, right? So these things interrelate. We call it the CBT triangle. In other words, what I think impacts what I do and impacts how I feel. But how also what I do impacts how I think and how I feel. So these things do interrelate. Perhaps the easiest thing to do is to make a behavior change, and that will influence how I feel and how I think. So try to do something different in those situations, kind of what Hanna had mentioned, and that will likely alter the other two that I mentioned.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that response.
You want to add something, Hanna?
That's okay. We're good. We're over time, so that's fine.
Oh, feel free. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, sorry to talk about control again, but we find you don't have feelings or have control over your automatic thoughts. You often don't have control over how your body responds, but you do have control on your behaviors in it. So when you start to feel anxious and nervous and your tummy gets upset or whatever it is, what are you doing in response? Do you sit and hyper focus on your tummy hurting, creating you more nervous? Or are you able to get up, go for a walk, reset, and get back to work to get your mind engaged in something else? So just something to think about too.
You said it much better than I did.
I want to just ask before we end today, how, with the unpredictability of things going on in our world and in our COVID world, like how important is it for people to, I guess, remember some of these tips and things moving forward as we go into the winter months and days are getting shorter, or just kind of that unknown? What are you, what do you tell people who say, like, it's so hard to move forward? Like any tips or advice on that?
I think a big thing that even personally has helped as the days get shorter and it gets darker earlier and you can't go outside as often because it, gets negative 30 degrees here in the winter, is that I'm not in it alone. Like the idea of common humanity, that if I'm feeling that, probably 9 or other people around me at that time are also feeling that way. Like Dr. Jacobi's identified so much, anxiety can feel really isolating. And if you just open your brain up to the idea that someone else is probably going through it too, and lean on each other for support, that can be really helpful, I find. Yeah.
I'm just a big fan of, that's not a religious thing, but the serenity prayer, control what you can, know what you can't control, and accept it. And that's kind of part of this as well. We can't do anything about the short days and the cold weather, but to Hannah's point about control, we can make decisions and choices about what do we want to do differently? Do we want to isolate when it's cold and 30 below, or do we want to go to the gym and work out? Call a friend and have a conversation, go, watch a happy movie. We can control those behavioral choices as well. So.
Excellent. Thank you both for all of the information and for spending some time with us today. So I want to mention, for those of you still on, there will be a short survey that you'll see on your screen. We'd appreciate the feedback with that. This presentation will be posted on our website that will be shared with you in the follow-up email. And also, we have a webinar next week, the second one in this staff empowerment series. That one will be on hiring in 2021 and beyond. And I think that will be really interesting. You're still welcome to register for that one and the one after that. So again, thank you, Dr. Jacobi. Thank you, Hanna. Thank you, Shauna, for helping out. And thank you to all of you for listening and for participating and for being with us this afternoon. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. So long.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Shauna.